Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Staffordshire Police Fire and Crime Panel. It's Monday the 18th of November 2024, 10 a.m, and we're in the Oak Room at the County Buildings. Welcome to the Police and Crime Commissioner and his team, and welcome members to this meeting. I assume we've all had copies of the paperwork and the necessary agendas, so I'll move straight to the agenda. Are there any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Lauren from Stafford, and she sent her substitute, Councillor Barron.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of September. Those meetings have been circulated. I'll assume that everyone's read them. Are there any comments? Can we accept them? Take that as a yes, thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, questions to the Commissioner from members of the public. We've had no...
Yes, we've got one from Councillor Jones.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Jones.
One from Mr. Jones, yes. I believe Mr. Jones is with us today. Would you like to come to the table, sit in a chair and acquaint us of that, please? Thank you. Would you put your microphone on, please? Press the button at the bottom. Okay, please carry on.
Sorry, I don't have a question in front of me, as I was just advised that it would be taken as read, so thank you.
Chair, the question is on the paper, in the paperwork pack, so you can take the question as read, and I think the Commissioner is prepared to give a verbal response.
Apologies for that. We'll take the question as read then. Commissioner, would you like to reply?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Morning, everybody. Gary's presented a very helpful question, actually, and an interesting one around reporting of information relating to domestic abuse, which, as you know, is a real priority for me. In conversation with Gary, we've just got one or two reservations about commenting on behalf of partners in terms of this response. And also where the question may have been prompted from. If it's okay with Mr. Jones, we've offered him an opportunity outside the meeting to have a more detailed conversation about this. And then I think that would lead us into a position where we can make a written response to the panel that looks after the interests of everybody involved. If that's okay with Mr. Jones and yourself, Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Jones, are you content with that?
Yes, Chairman, thank you.
Okay, and you are you looking for a timely response, or are you leave it with the Commissioner to come back to you as soon as he can?
I'm not sure of the regular schedule of these meetings, but perhaps by the next meeting of the panel, if that's reasonable.
More than reasonable, Chairman. In fact, I hope that my Chief Executive and I are keen to meet with Gary at the earliest opportunity, and we'll inform you accordingly.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones. That's very kind of you to offer that. Item 5 on the agenda, decisions published by the Commissioner. The following decisions have been published, and they are listed in the paperwork that we have before us today. Item 6 on the agenda, Police and Crime panel, Police and Crime MTFS update. Would you like to address the meeting, please, Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman. This is our regular opportunity just to brief you on the process ahead of budget conversations. Anybody who's involved in public sector, local authorities, etc., will know this is a key time. We're all waiting anxiously to understand the government settlement figures, what they'll be doing to provide support to the public sector. Generally, we would have that information by the middle of December, although earlier is always better. I think it's fair to say, Chair, there is considerable nervousness at the moment. pay increases in recent months, some additional implications around pensions, but particularly the budget statement around national insurance increases have given not just the private sector, but the public sector some reason to pause and have concern. Staffordshire Police, about £50 million of their budget is related to third-party spend. So this is services that we buy in from typically other private sector, from private sector organisations, construction projects, all sorts of support for the service, etc. It appears at the moment that they're talking instantly about increasing prices in respect of the national insurance increase. And regrettably, that will mean a pressure on police and on fire and rescue. We have yet to hear from government as to whether that will be mitigated in the settlement. There have been more positive statements around pay increases and more positive statements around the police and fire service's own national insurance contributions, but not those from outside. So we're facing an inflationary pressure there that we didn't anticipate. In addition, there are a number of manifesto commitments, which in the main I'm very supportive of, particularly around reducing knife crime and significantly halving violence against women and girls. And there's a lot of conversation at the moment about how that might be done, whether it's with new prevention panel approaches. Clearly very welcome that government recognises that these issues are not just for the police to resolve, but the wider partnership, community partners including councils, health, housing associations and others. But there is some nervousness about the existing funding streams, whether it's safer streets, safer women at night, serious violence duties, support for drug and alcohol, treatment and so on. And these are all effectively spent and overseen at the moment across all of Staffordshire. And there's some, I would actually describe it as anxiety at the minute about how this is going to be done going forward. The most significant manifesto statement, which is keeping me awake at the moment, is around the neighbourhood policing promise. Now, members and anybody watching may remember that during the general election there was talk of 13,000 additional police, PCSOs or specials to support neighbourhood policing efforts. Good news. What might have bypassed some people is that that wasn't to be funded in the same way as the previous 20,000 police officer uplift. Essentially, it was to be funded from productivity savings. All well and good, but both our services are fully engaged on trying to achieve productivity savings in the interest of local priorities as well as other national priorities. And there isn't much room to squeeze additional savings out of the activity that we've already got underway. I think more significant to that is that some police forces have taken a very different approach to Staffordshire to neighbourhood policing in recent years. Some police forces don't have any PCSOs, where Staffordshire's got, I believe, the fourth highest number of PCSOs per head of population in the country. So our commitment to neighbourhood policing, particularly PCSO numbers, is high. And this panel would have heard from me about the local operating model review that we did 2.5 years ago to really enforce the local policing model, make sure that neighbourhood policing was able to focus on its tasks, not be overtly distracted into response work, although of course they do support that. So we already have officers, we already have PCSOs. In my own brief around the antisocial behaviour pilot, we've had wardens operating antisocial behaviour areas, and they are all gainfully employed and actively reducing neighbourhood crime around the county. So I was somewhat disappointed to hear the other day that the baseline for the 13,000 national increase is to be the existing numbers in forces. So this wasn't to look at outcomes, it wasn't to look at setting targets, allowing local experience, local knowledge to determine the best way to deal with this issue of neighbourhood policing, but to determine it by you will have X number of additional officers and Y number of additional PCSOs, regardless of where we'd been and regardless of where we've come from. I don't think that is an appropriate way forward when we've got 43 local police forces with very different needs and ambitions. Notwithstanding, if they are not to be funded, then what it may mean is the Chief Constable having to consider alternatives as to where those officers and PCSOs, or certainly the officers, are moved from. So what other priority areas are they to move from to support our already considerable neighbourhood policing offer? So there are a number of pressures, I'm afraid, facing the services, some general around the wider cost of doing business, particularly exacerbated by the national insurance increase, but others specifically to this service area. Chief Executive and I are in the next 2 days at a meeting in London. All the national chiefs and PCCs will be together. We've got a briefing, a keynote speech from the Home Secretary. We're very anxious to hear her thoughts on some of these areas of concern, and also to hear about proposals for more nationalisation, centralisation of policing functions, which may also affect Staffordshire. If serious organised crime is to be taken more nationally, it's almost certain to result in a top slice of local budgets. Now that is actually potentially counterproductive not only to our local priorities but to the mission the government has around neighbourhood policing as well, because they are intrinsically linked to drug crime, vehicle crime and other organised crime types. So this is a nervous time for me as Commissioner, probably the most nervous I've had in the last 3 years. I need to say something, Chairman, which I think, and I've already had this conversation with the Chief Constable, and I'm going to be having the conversation with the public during my consultation on council tax. We have local priorities and we have local ambitions set by the residents of Staffordshire. And we absolutely have national duties. What I'm very nervous about is increasing council tax, or even being given additional freedoms to increase council tax more than we have in the past, to meet national manifesto commitments. I do not think that is what people voted for. However, my first duty is to make sure that Staffordshire is safe and we're looking after victims and continuing to drive down crime and antisocial behaviour. So that's the conundrum I face in the next 2 or 3 months as I discuss council tax with the public and indeed bring back to you my proposals for that going forward. On a more positive note, Chairman, you do see here some figures for the 6-month position. In the main, they are as reported 6 months ago. We are very, very close to hitting the forecast numbers that we gave you back then. But I wonder if, with your permission, I might just ask David Greensmith, who's acting as our 151 officer for the office as well as in that role for fire at the moment, if he might just take you through some of the headlines from the 2 reports in terms of MTF pressures and the contingencies that we put in place to cover those off. Is that okay with you, Chairman?
Yes, the couple of points you made in your opening, Commissioner, that I'd like to come back on. Shall I do that after David's reported, or shall I just mention them now?
Whichever suits you.
Well, The comment around PCSOs, the famous phrase back in the day, the PCSOs were the information and intelligence gatherers on the street for the force. And I think we'd be concerned if that activity ceased, because information and intelligence is so important, and whether it's officers in plain clothes or PCSOs. But I put the comment within the context of neighbourhood policing. If they're walking around in pairs in the community, they are looking and taking information on board. So that's just an observation at that point, Commissioner, if I may. Thank you. David, would you like to...
Sorry, Chairman, just going to very briefly come back on that point. There's no intention in Staffordshire to reduce the cohort of PCSOs. The concerns I've expressed are at being required to increase the numbers without that necessarily being an evidenced argument, when we already have very high numbers of PCSOs per head of population. I absolutely understand the value of PCSOs, not least in their visibility, their relationship with local residents and businesses, but they are fundamentally at the heart of our local harm reduction hub activity. So that's why we've got those high numbers. I thought that would be taken into account by Home Office in deciding how many we should have in the future, especially when given some places don't have any.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. And good morning to members of the panel. I'm going to just take you through just some of the key points around the report that's in front of you today. Firstly, I guess, as the panel will be aware, this is an update on the current year position for 24-5, based upon the reported position, as the Commissioner says, at the end of September. It reviews the year-end forecast position, importantly, and of course looks at some of the changing assumptions as we move forward into the medium term. So this is really an update for the panel and a bit of a scene set ready for the budget set and the MTFS when we come into February next year. So setting the budget in MTFS, of course, remains challenging. We look forward, I say as we look forward and consider the budget for next year. As we look forward, there is, as the Commissioner says, material uncertainty, and that's not just around the financial position, but of course the financial position isn't assisted either by a further single-year settlement that's been announced by the Chancellor as part of the budget recently. So the report, as usual, follows the normal sort of pathway, looking at the budget for next year, ready for the position to be reported to on the 3rd of February. And of course, preparation is already ongoing within the force to make sure that the budget setting process is well underway. And indeed, for the panel's information, if you see the timetable that's laid out within page 3 of the report, takes you through the steps that we're going through up to the date of the budget setting on the 3rd of February. So firstly, I'd just like to just move on to the Commissioner made a point about the reported position as at the end of Q2. The forecast, importantly, is in line with the budget. In fact, it's actually showing a small saving of £200,000 after the use of reserves. A detailed revenue position is set out for the panel within Appendix 1 of the report on page 13. And I think the panel remember that was a request from the update from the previous year, just to provide some detailed financial information for the panel. Of course, there are a number of factors driving additional spend in the year, as there always are, and also some compensating, mitigating savings. But obviously I'm pleased to report to the panel today that the position for the year end and at the end of September is on track. If I can just move on now to pick up one or two of the assumptions contained within the updated MTFS. Obviously it's been subject to scrutiny, and we have been reviewing the assumptions which largely remain unchanged. However, we have got one significant change that's been made within the updated report, and that's the estimate around the pay award for 25-6. Now, the original report assumed a 2% pay award for 25-6. We've now increased that to 3%. So this increase in the unfunded pay award assumption has been reflected within the MTFS, which is shown on page 7. And you can see the forecast movements within that table into the medium term. I think that pay award is the only real material change as we look forward, and that assumption has been reflected and does increase the funding gap by 27-28 and increases that gap to 22.6 million that you'll be able to see on that within that table. Now, the Commission's already talked about the national insurance increase that was announced by the Chancellor. Now, we have assumed, of course, that that's been fully funded within the MTFS, as was announced by the Chancellor. But I just want to reflect on what the Commissioner said about the impact of costs being passed on from the private sector through our areas of non-pay. And just to give the panel an idea, you know, a 1% increase in non-pay inflation would increase the cost base by around about £500,000. So it is quite material if that increase gets passed on through our non-pay lines. I'd also like to signpost the panel to the sensitivity analysis, which is included within paragraph 6.7, and you can see there the key elements of the budget and the impact of a 1% movement on some of those assumptions should they occur as we move forward. I think it's also important that the panel should note that the force has a comprehensive efficiency plan which covers 4 pillars: productivity, procurement, income generation, and staffing service levels. This, alongside the resource allocation challenge panels which are ongoing at the moment, has indeed identified saving opportunities with it for the current year. So 2.8 million has been confirmed to date. We've got £200,000 worth of savings that are being forecast, which leaves £2.9 million worth of savings to be found for the remainder of the current year. Now, of course, the Commissioner will continue to use earmark reserves effectively, and the budget reserve is still available at £4.1 million in order to support the 25-6 budget position and of course, the estimated gap that's shown within the report of £7.6 million. The Commissioner talked about preset flexibility, and of course that will be a consideration, and as the Commissioner says, the Commissioner will be asking residents as part of the consultation process as we go into December. So, just for information, the current assumption for council tax for 25-6 is 2.99%, so that would be an £8.18 increase in Band D for a typical council taxpayer within Staffordshire. For information as well for the panel, the capital programme position is included within Appendix 2 of the report, and there's also some detailed narrative on page 11 of the report. The plans across, the capital plans across Staffordshire Police and the Commissioner's Office, of course, are now being refreshed and reviewed as part of the budget process. So, Chairman, just in summary, the overall financial position is on track for the current year, but there are clearly some significant financial uncertainties ahead due to the material level of uncertainties the Commission has discussed, and also the financial position that we face moving forward. So that's a summary. Hopefully I've picked out some of the key areas of the report, but Chairman, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, David, for that. And thank you for the clarification around resource allocation panels. We've struggled with that during our preparation. We couldn't quite get a handle on what that was about, but thank you for the clarity there. Just briefly, and it'll come out in February, of course, but we talk about savings. We want to keep the head count, I understand, of the police officers at 2,000 approximately. Increasing call handlers, we don't want to affect those numbers. Where can you possibly go for further savings? Is there anything in that comment at the moment you could clarify for us?
Well, Chairman, you've made a very good point, because the bulk of the budget is people and affording very good people, and we've been working very hard to increase our officer numbers, maintain PCSO numbers. and there's a sort of, whilst those are now fixed under the neighbourhood policing proposals as baselines, actually, you know, I welcome that. I don't want to see reductions in those numbers or to find savings unnecessarily through redundancies. I think just one other factor there, which is a little complicated, and apologies, but I raised this with the Staffordshire MPs when the Chief Constable, Chief Fire Officer and I met with them on Thursday in London. The baseline for neighbourhood policing also includes the increase in officers that we had over and above our target last year as a result of the failure to recruit by the London Met. Now, a number of forces took advantage of that shortfall in London to increase their officer numbers. I don't think it's appropriate that they are also bedded into this baseline that needs to increase. The pressure is on how we afford the increase. We've already budgeted to maintain what we think are the critical numbers. And the panel will be aware that Staffordshire is, I believe, one of just 4 forces that has still not got back to its peak number of officers of about 12, 15 years ago. So maintaining those numbers is key. And for me, whilst 101 and contact and customer service remains a priority in my local police and crime plan, we are holding a freeze on the numbers in contact. They are not to reduce until the service has got to the levels we want it to be. So you're quite right. It leaves us in a very difficult position in terms of where else to make savings. Now, I think government, but the whole of industry at the moment is looking very carefully at productivity. Where can technology help? Where can new ways of doing things help? And we have been investing considerable investment in new technology, particularly in the contact area. There's something going live in the next few weeks which will automate a lot of processes, should lead to a better impression, better service levels for individuals, as well as maximising the efficiency of that part of the organisation. There's new efficiencies around forensics, new efficiencies around energy costs, heating costs, lighting, new solar energy, various sources of income, a more effective team managing the maintenance of vehicles, and all of these things that you would expect us to look at. The key is that the quantum is, we've been aiming for a position of sustained growth and investment. Now there is a pressure to grow beyond what we would locally design in that is not funded. That is the challenge. So it's tricky. I also mentioned with the MPs, and it's useful, I think, just to note on page 6, under some of the pressures, there's a mention of the XL bully dogs. Now, this is, in my opinion, an absolutely correct and appropriate change to the Dangerous Dogs Act, especially given the tragic loss of life in Stonell last year. Looking after the dogs, looking after the, if you like, the unintended consequences of that are already costing the organisation hundreds of thousands of pounds. Now, these are essentially duties that I don't believe should fall to the police. A change in legislation should be appropriately covered by government settlement. So we're looking for some recognition of various aspects like that to reduce some of the pressures on the organisation. It's going to be tricky. It means we're looking potentially at staff numbers. It means, although there are no firm plans for that at the minute, it means other areas are looking to move police officers with warrants and many years of training into staff roles, which is not the best use of their skills or training or experience. So they keep their numbers up by putting police officers who should be on the front line or investigating, using their specialisms, into administration tasks. Quite frankly, they might not be the best people in those roles either. We've got excellent specialist staff who are the best people to have in those roles. So it is a conundrum, one which I hope to be able to share more detail on with you as we get into the new year. But you're right to identify the challenge.
Yes, it's listening to your comments there, Commissioner. I think your opening word, anxiety. I think the panel will be anxious to hear those comments because neighbourhood policing and people want to feel safe in Staffordshire. So we'll look forward with interest to getting a lot of clarity around that comment in the February report. May I just ask colleagues if they have any comments on the financial statement? Charlotte.
In paragraph 4.6, you talk about the increase in levers in 24-25 having a beneficial impact on the budget. Is this, has this happened by accident, or is this part of policy to encourage new recruits and those people at the top of the pay scale to move on? Because clearly it may have a beneficial impact on the budget, but may not have a beneficial impact on the service.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Atkins, and to you, Chairman. I think it's a fair point, this one, and actually we're actively recruiting, encouraging transferees from other organisations to try and maintain our experience level, not least in the new road crime team. In fact, Chairman, it's perhaps remiss of me to have been emphasising the what's keeping me awake. There's a lot of stuff we've done as planned, and particularly in relation to the my new plan to invest in rural crime, the new roads crime team, which has seen us bring the motorway policing unit back in that was previously shared with West Midlands, and bringing expert and experienced people into some of those roles has meant we've been out looking for people with some years of experience. But this is a natural situation, people retiring, and it's likely in our next few years we're going to have more recruits paid at a lower level than the higher one. But where there's an operational requirement, we're very anxious to bring people across with the experience, or indeed promote them. We've got some wonderful people in the team who are being promoted now. And Chair, I mean, I think the word anxiety is fair enough, and it is, it's being felt across the country. But I would ask members to bear in mind that, particularly in the case of fire, we're in a very solid position. In the case of police, this is about as solid as it gets. So our starting position is way, way better than some of our, some of the other forces, where the anxiety levels are considerable. They're hitting the red emergency button at the moment. So we'll get through this. We will plan our way through this. And I will take the public with me on the decisions we have to make. But this is not, at the moment, feeling like we can invest in their safety in the way I would like, because we are meeting obligations placed on us by others.
Thank you. Charlotte again.
Can I just ask about income generation in 2.6? You talk about income generation. I'm just interested to know how you generate income from the police service.
It's limited, very limited, and actually one of the pressures I mentioned before about reallocation of core partnership funds is that there could be some pressures on the area of work of my team, where we, for example, work with the City Council and County Council around providing support for domestic abuse. The contribution of partners is considerable, so their capability to contribute to support services, prevention, reoffending, reducing reoffending, are also areas of challenge. The income for police is very limited. In the main, it's going to be around interest on capital and savings, where we've done reasonably well in the last year or two. I regret to say I don't think inflation's going to come rushing down, so we're probably going to get more interest than we'd originally budgeted. There's one or two things at this point that will be tweaked. I noticed David mentioned the revised pay award. On fire, you'll notice that on energy, we're looking to greatly reduce the expectation for 5% increase down to 2. It might not hit 2, but it will be a reduction. So there's comings and goings yet to be played in, and some of the income will be around returns on balances that we hold, which of course is much cheaper than going out to the market to borrow for our projects.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Krupski.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner, it's just following on from a point the Chair has made. You say that you're losing sleep. Well, that's not exactly what you said, but you had concerns. My concerns would be slightly of a longer term. Clearly, finding savings is more restricted from the smaller number of expenditure lines that you have this year. And over the years, you've had your low-hanging fruit, cost savings, sale of assets, productivity, efficiency improvements, amalgamation of local police and fire stations, etc. So going forward, 2006, 2007, 2000, 2008, clearly the challenges are going to be huge. If we look at the level of challenges now, and you will become far more restricted, my great concern is where you'll be able to find the funding from.
Sorry, sir, where I find the savings from, or the funding to potentially fill the gap?
No, where you'll find the funding to provide a level of service that you anticipate. Because clearly at the moment, we find things rather challenging. But you still have a level of productivity efficiencies, some cost savings, but those lines are being reduced by every year. Sorry, have I made that clear?
No, I think you're very nicely articulating that this is going to get more difficult the further in we go. I think there's going to need to be a trade-off between what people are prepared to pay and the service they get. And there may be some areas of service that are compromised. Every area will be looked at. Perhaps where we're gold standard, it might need to be reconsidered. But that for me is a last resort. However, equally, I recognise it's tough for people, and I'm very concerned about adding to the tax burden with additional local taxes. It's just difficult enough at the moment. So it is the nature of the challenge. I think one of the things that's very positive is we've seen savings as a result of the sharing of back office services between police and fire. Real step forward in the productivity of the team that look after the vehicles, maintain and provide the vehicles for police and fire. And on that basis, we're ahead of the game in terms of collaboration. Government is quite correct to talk about collaboration. There may be opportunities beyond that within forces to share software solutions, back office provision, things of that nature. I don't believe they're looking to regionalise or centralise to that degree. And my concern is a big move to redesigning or restructuring police will be expensive. I don't see having extra layers of management being less expensive than what we've currently got. So there may yet be challenges there, but we are in a better position than many because of that good local relationship between police and fire. And I think we may be pushing on harder. We've got 6 new police posts opened in fire settings this year, over the last couple of years rather, and more of that is what the public would like to see us doing. So there's no shortage of trying to do that. Our asset base is restricted in terms of freeing up capital, unfortunately. So the real value is in making sure that our productivity investments, and we have considerable new expertise coming in into the service in terms of IT, but also around new ways of working. Those are the things that are going to have to land in the next few years. The challenge, as you will know if you've been involved in investment in business or private sector, is that you invest and then it's some time later that you tend to reap the rewards. It's not an immediate saving. But we will be doing our best.
Thank you. Just listening to your comment there about services may be compromised, anything associated with change and change management builds or enhances risk. And I think there's a theme that I'm picking up on here, that there are a lot of risk management activities going on at the moment. And there was something in the report, some of the grants are soon to come forward. Are they being catered for with an assumption about inflation? But can you speak to your view of the current risks that you're facing at the moment, mindful of the comments that you've received today?
I think, Chairman, other than the general, I'd rather not at the moment. I think this is very much a process for me to reflect the residents' appetite and expectations, and for the two chiefs to come to me with proposals that they feel pose the lowest risk. We'll mention later that the fire service have just been through their a review of their risk assessment plan. There's a considerable amount of work being done at the moment to identify where pressures are, where risks are. And it may be as a result of that process that we are able to, without any risk to the public or very low risk to the public, consider perhaps areas where the service coverage is higher than it needs to be, or higher than we're seeing elsewhere. But those are very much operational determinations. I would look to be receiving advice and clear steer around all of those. I'm not in a position today to say where I think if we do have to make new savings, they will fall. At the moment, I'm very keen that we get a settlement, very keen to understand if our concerns have been understood, and very keen that the unintended consequences of some commitments are not driven through without due consideration. My own team has already made considerable savings over the last 3 years. We're adding more in again to that group pot. We very much see ourselves as part of the group with police and fire. And I can just assure members and anybody online that we don't take this lightly. These are definitely not no pain choices, and we want to avoid the risk.
Right, I hear loud and clear what you're saying, Commissioner, and February will be an interesting time to get a bit more information around that. Excuse me a moment. Sorry, I missed the question over there.
Thank you, Chair. Can I go back to the subject of increasing levers? And the word retirement was mentioned, and I guess that's the most forecastable area of looking at levers. It brought me to thinking about the, as it were, the stability of the workforce. People can leave an organisation for various reasons. It can be for career change, personal circumstances. It can be through discontent and dissatisfaction with the job. So perhaps can't be answered now, but I wonder at some time we could have some information on the degree of churn within the organisation over recent years, whether that's stayed stable or not. Stability is what you ideally want. Quite hard to achieve, mind you, but that's what you want. So some information on that, some stats, and the attitude towards it would be useful. Thank you.
Very happy to do that, Chair. The last 3 years we've seen improvements in morale, reductions in sickness. It's not a case that people are looking to leave Staffordshire. Coming out of Engage, having a good inspection report this year has actually given most of the workforce a boost. They appreciate that crime's coming down. They appreciate that antisocial behaviour is down another 12-15% this year. So there's tremendous progress being made by the service at the moment. And that is all actually with one of the, by percentage, one of the youngest workforces in the country. Our uplift commitment was greater than many because of a previous retirement trend. So we've already got quite a lot of young officers doing a fantastic job, and every day they're more experienced than the last. So this is not something we're new to, and I'm very happy to come and bring some figures that will reassure you about that. But as I said to Councillor Atkins, getting the balance, particularly around supervisor level expertise, you need experience around certain points of tension. So we've got a new lead on forensics landed this year. We've got a new lead on a new staff member on IT, who I believe will be with us in the new year. The Chief Constable is constantly looking at his own senior leadership team for expertise from elsewhere. We've expanded the public protection unit, and those sorts of areas are critical because that's where the harm is. But this is sort of core business for the for human resources and the learning and development team in the service.
Thank you. Commissioner, paragraph 5.9 on page 25 of the report. That was the line that prompted me to ask the question around risk. Could you briefly make any comments regarding 5.9?
So that's about the ring-fenced uplift maintenance grant and the top-up grant. So those were money specifically to support the increase our share of the 20,000 nationally, but also that the extra officers that we took on the basis that the Met had not met their reached their target. The second top-up grant was for a shorter period of time. So I'd absolutely expect those types of cover to increase, but this is all part of the settlement conversation and possibly the redistribution of funding around the wider community safety partnership. It's going to be a fascinating few weeks.
Certainly, thank you. Councillor Atkins, did you have a question?
No, it relates to fire. So we're going on to fire.
Yes, we'll be going to fire. Yeah, okay. Are there any more questions for the Commissioner on that item 6 of the agenda, the MTFS for the police? Okay, we'll move to item 7 then, Fire and Rescue MTFS. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, in addition to all the general concerns I've already expressed, anybody that saw my public performance meeting with the Chief Fire Officer the other day will not only have been extremely encouraged by the really top-notch inspection report that they had this summer, one of the 3 or 4 best in the country this year, but also at our financial robustness in fire. And you can see that again with a very accurate forecast that we made 6 months ago, notwithstanding the pressures that we face. I will just ask David again, if he wouldn't mind, to point out the 1 or 2 key differences, and perhaps just explain some of the projects we have in hand. I noticed that, for example, Brood Fire Station capital costs are a little higher than we were expecting, and some of the work we're doing around service transformation. If that's okay, Chairman.
Yes, please, carry on. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll try to avoid any duplication between the police update and the fire update, because we have got obviously some similarities between the 2 updates. So I guess just to kick off, as with the policing report that we've just been through, the budget and MTFS for fire is still going to be just as challenging, with the ongoing uncertainty, as I said, afforded by a single year settlement as we move forward. And for fire as well, there are some complications around some of the funding grants that were received, and some doubt around how they are going to continue into the medium term. But firstly, the update of the MTFS is for the 5-year period 24/5 to 28/9, as approved by the Commissioner on the 12th of February of this year. And as the Commissioner has already reflected on, for the first time in a number of years, the approved MTFS for fire did include a broadly balanced position into the medium term. Made me feel quite uncomfortable, really, given the challenges that we've seen over a number of years. But of course, this improved financial position has been supported by, a significant amount of work and the savings that have been delivered through the business transformation work that's been supported by the Commissioner and led by the Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Glyn Lughney. I think the panel, I'd like the panel to note really that the work of the transformation team hasn't stopped despite this relatively improved financial position, but in fact it's continued. We're now in the second phase of transformation work, and it's through the transformation and the work that that's been undertaken that led to the HMIC FRS stating within their recent inspection that the service received a good grade for making the service affordable now and into the future, which is clearly very important. And the report also, as I did with the previous report, includes the budget pathway for setting the budget, and the fire meeting will be on the 10th of February, which is the week following the police meeting. So obviously, again, the fire service are undertaking their detailed budget challenge sessions with all budget holders in order to make sure that we're in a position ready to present to the panel. I'd also like to update, obviously, the panel with the financial position as at the end of Q2. Again, the forecast for fire is broadly in line with the budget that we set. In fact, again, it's showing a small saving of £100,000. The detailed revenue position set out within Appendix 1, which is on page 11 of the report. And again, whilst there are some savings within the report, there are also some compensating and mitigating factors and additional costs. But overall, I'm pleased to report that the position, as it was with police, but the position for fire is on track. The original budget assumptions contained within the MTFS have also been subject to scrutiny and review. And again, the assumptions have remained largely unchanged. The difference for fire is we'd already assumed a 3% pay award for 25-26. So that isn't a change as we move forward. But we've left that assumption for 25-6 at 3% with 2% for the following years. The MTFS summary has been updated, and within paragraph 4.5 of the report on page 6, you can see some of the savings that are coming through and some of the additional costs. I will pick out one or two of these if I may, Chair. Firstly, the pay award and pressures, we've actually got a saving coming through from fire in the current year because we did assume a 5% pay award and it came through at 4%. The Commissioner's already talked about some of the work we've done on our non-cost pay review, which led to some assumptions and some savings coming through from our utility costs, where we saw a significant spike, obviously part of the inflationary cost increases, but that's stabilised now, and we're more comfortable to predict a small saving as we move forward. And then when we look at some of the additional costs, I'll pick out the one of the big areas where we talk about investment into the service. We've got some additional costs because we are investing, following some recommendations, but we're investing into the IT department within fire. So we've got some additional posts going in, and we're also investing in a project and portfolio manager that we're recruiting for later this week. I just want to mention one thing to the panel as well. The MTFS does assume that the 4% funding guarantee introduced as part of the 24/5 settlement will remain in place for 25-26. It doesn't increase, but we've left it flat. Now that is quite an important part of funding for fire, so that was £828,000 worth of funding for 24-25, and across the public sector that was an additional 268 million that was pledged by the previous government. So we are assuming that stays in, but of course that is a risk as we move into the settlement later this year. Again, we talked about earlier about the national insurance increase. Again, for fire, we've assumed that that is fully funded, and we're awaiting to see potentially what the impact of any cost increases could be on the non-pay costs. That is one that we're looking at, but again, of course, there's a sensitivity around that as we move forward. Talking sensitivity, I'd just like to signpost the panel to paragraph 5.3, which again shows a 1% movement in some of the key areas of the budget for fire. Like I said previously, the Commissioner will always continue to use earmark reserves intelligently and effectively in order to support the financial position as we move forward. I think it's important to note for fire that our earmark reserves have reduced significantly over the last 2 to 3 years. We have invested into the capital programme in order to reduce capital costs, capital financing costs, and our future borrowing costs, which is important. So the actual usable earmark reserve was reduced down to £7 million as at the 31st of March of this year. Likewise, for fire, the Commission, of course, will be consulting the public around the level of council tax and the proposals as we move forward. So there is some talk for fire of potentially the referendum limit being increased to £5, but of course this is subject to national agreement, and we won't know until the settlement comes out quite what that referendum limit is going to be. So for fire, the assumption is a council tax increase of 2.99% for next year. So that's equivalent to £2.59 for a Band D. So a relatively modest amount at 2.99%. So going back to the sensitivity, a 1% change in council tax for fire is worth around about £300,000 per year and amounts to an additional 87 pence for that Band D council taxpayer. So just for information as well for the panel, the capital programme position is included within Appendix 2 and is accompanied by some narrative on page 9 of the report. The capital plans across Staffordshire Fire are of course being refreshed as part of the budget process, and we've now introduced the new capital framework into the service, which is working very well. The service has just taken delivery of 2 enhanced rescue pumps, which has been a significant investment this year. So the cost of those 2 appliances is around about £750,000, which is in addition to the 2 aerial ladder platforms which came in last year. So we've had over £2 million worth of investment in just 4 vehicles during the last sort of 18-month period. The Commissioner wanted me to just touch on Brood. So we have been looking at trying to refurbish Brood Fire Station, just to update it really, just to make sure the facilities are reflective of what we need as a modern fire and rescue service. But unfortunately, the first pass of the additional cost for Brood came in well over the budgeted envelope that we got. So we're now going back and actually reviewing quite how we're going to deliver that project. So it means that Brood has been pushed to the right, it has been delayed, but we are still looking to deliver an amended or a changed version of the project within the 25-6 capital programme. So in summary, good news, the current financial position is on track. There are some significant challenges as we look ahead into the medium term due to that uncertainty around the settlement, but of course we're hoping that settlement's going to come in just before Christmas as it usually does. So, Chairman, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I think Commissioner wanted to make a comment.
Just very briefly, Chairman. I think the fact that the 2 6-monthly positions are so close to what we forecast is real testament to David's team, but also John Bloomer's team in police. It drives me nuts when forecasts are off. It means they aren't very good, and these ones are very good. And I'm really pleased with where we're going in terms of budgeting and understanding our business financially. It's in a good position. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs Atkins, did you...
In paragraph 3.7, you talk there about the costs of crewing deficiency have reduced but remain above budget. And you talk about 8 casual contracts. So what is the vacancy level among full-time firefighters at the moment? And what implications is that having on the budget? And I also see that you have talked about savings in support staff. What impact have those savings had on the back office functions of the fire service?
Briefly before David comes in, because he's been involved in the programme around some right sizing of some of our activity. I think that it's something around sickness pay and so on that we keep a very close eye on in the service. It's difficult as a firefighter. If you've got back injury or any sort of physical injury, it does limit what you can do in a way that it might not in other jobs. But making sure people have got the support to get back as soon as possible is really key. And you'll note that on-call pay has increased compared to previous years. A real positive here. We've got 20 more people on the on-call team than we had last year. We're retaining very healthily, and that on-call pay is up because they're doing more than they have done in the past, partly as a result of the efforts, hundreds of extra calls that they're responding to in the pilot of riding with threes as well. So right sizing and providing enough experience and opportunity is a key to retaining people and recruiting them as well into the service. But David, would you mind just picking up the staff thing?
Yes, so thank you for the question. So in terms of, I'll try and pick it up from a position of, you talked about a vacancy level for whole-time firefighters. Well, just to answer that question, there isn't a vacancy level for whole-time firefighters. Generally, we are fully recruited to. The terms where we talk about casual contracts, this is around covering some of the gaps we may have on hold time because of, as the Commissioner said, because of longer term illness, because of issues around sickness. So we always offer a number of contracts for our on-call personnel to cover shifts where we know, for example, we've got a 3-month gap on a whole-time shift through illness, through sickness, or for whatever reason that is. So we try and manage and make sure that we haven't got any gaps on our whole-time crewing, and that's one of the additional costs that we incur. But of course, the calculation is quite finely balanced because we also we do have some savings coming through to mitigate the additional costs that we're incurring. But overall, we try and make sure that the number of casual contracts is minimised as much as possible. But the answer to the question is we don't have, the terms of the vacancy levels, there aren't any. And in fact, at the moment, obviously, we're trying to make sure that we're recruiting whole-time firefighters. We're just in the moment of doing job-related tests for our next intake of 16 firefighters. So we're trying to make sure that we're recruiting in an effective way to make sure that our whole-time crewing level of, which is 232 whole-time firefighters, does make sure that we maintain that as we move forward.
Considering that you're over budget on this issue, does that imply then that the sickness records are higher than normal? Because if you're above budget, then clearly you're covering more firefighters who are off sick for whatever reason, either long term or short term. So are sickness levels going up? Is that the issue? And subsequently, I also want to ask whether the 3-man crewing arrangement, has that been factored into the medium-term financial strategy? Because of course the trial doesn't come to an end until December, so obviously a decision on that has not yet been made officially, as I understand it.
So in terms of the costings around the crewing for the 3-man crewing, so absolutely that's incorporated into the budget and into the MTFS, because in terms of the impact of that trial is greater availability and an additional turnout. So there is an additional cost to the service for the three-man crewing trial. So I don't, sometimes there's thinks there's a saving through turning out with less. There isn't, because we're turning out to more incidents. We're turning out quicker and we're increasing our availability. But of course there is an additional cost to that, and we at the moment are just trying to make sure we evaluate that correctly to make sure we're reflecting it within our medium-term financial plans, because budgeting for our on-call crewing is always quite challenging, because we always struggle to recruit up to what our establishment levels are. Despite significant efforts across the service, we're always recruiting, and as the Commissioner says, our numbers of on-call firefighters are increasing. Indeed, year on year, they're up by over 20 heads. So, positive trajectory, but it's always difficult to crew or to recruit up to what our full establishment would be. So we always have to apply a vacancy factor to make sure that we're budgeting correctly during the year. So it's always a challenge.
What are sickness levels? I mean, where are they going? Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they pretty static? You know, historically, where are we in terms of sickness levels among firefighters?
They're pretty static, but at the public performance meeting the other day, we got some old data sets which I wasn't particularly comfortable with. We've been looking at some new ways of reporting on this in the governance boards that I have. We're going to take that to the next public performance meeting. If it's helpful, Chairman and Councillor, we can bring some of those to the next panel report, just to give you some reassurance around sickness numbers. Just as an aside, but related to your question around policing, actually the challenge on fire around experience is probably more considerable than policing in the next 2 or 3 years. We've got quite a number of whole-time firefighters who are coming up to their retirement age, and some very senior people as well, leaving us in the next couple of years. So there is a similar challenge around the balance of experience and new enthusiasm and vigour to get right in the fire service as well. How many people applied for those 16 roles, David, do you know? It's normally hundreds, isn't it?
So there was about, I believe, around about 900 and just over 900 people applied for 16 roles.
These are very popular jobs. We won't have a vacancy issue around
and we've taken, Chairman, we've taken over 200 prospects, or 200 over 200 applicants through the job-related tests that are ongoing at the moment.
Still waiting for the gender balance statistics for new recruits, which I asked about last time.
Okay.
In terms of that overall position, I would have to come back with that figure. So obviously we do monitor very carefully that the balance around certainly the gender balance and the diversity of our recruitment. So we do keep those statistics. Yeah.
Commissioner?
Apologies, Chairman. I do recall Councillor Atkins asking, and if we've not responded, that's an apology.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question around the reserves and balances. In 8.2, it says that we currently hold £1.9 million in reserves, and this has been the same amount for quite a long time. The question is just, is this sustainable considering how much prices have gone up? Do we think that this is at the right level?
So thank you for that question. So we've got two reserves. We've got a general reserve and we've got an earmark reserve. Now I talked earlier about the earmark reserve, which is there to support a number of different areas of our finances, and that's supported by the reserve strategy that you will all see that we update on an annual basis. Now, in terms of the general reserve, that's more specific, and that's really there just to protect the service against any significant or material occurrences during the year. So, for example, significant flooding or a significant major incident that occurred within the county, Should that happen during the year, then that reserve, that 1.9 million, is there to support such an occurrence. So, which is one of the reasons why we've not used it for a number of years, because we haven't had such a material incident. I think the closest we've come is in 2018, when we had the really challenging weather conditions, when it was very hot and we had all the grass fires. That was probably the closest we've come to looking at whether we should be utilising any of the general reserve. But yeah, that's what it's there for.
I suppose that's the question then. If we've had it set at 1.9 million for several years, are we still confident that that's the right level?
It's risk assessed on an annual basis, and we'll risk assess it again when we bring the budget forward. The guidance, although there's no real guidance about general reserve, we try to make sure that it's maintained at a figure that's lower than 5% of the revenue budget that we set. So we could increase it slightly, but at the moment we've risk assessed it and said that actually 1.9 million is still reasonable to cover off some of those higher risks that we've got within the county.
Commissioner.
Chair, my view with reserves is if they're too small, it's really serious, because it can catch you out. However, if they're too big, then you might be asking for council taxpayers to pay more than they need to on the basis you've been prudent in the past. I'm comfortable with the level they're at. There are one or two risks emerging. One is a big system update to our shared control centre with West Midlands, and there's considerable uncertainty in that service at the moment, with changes of governance and Chief Fire Officer, various other things at the moment. That's potentially where we might dip in and use reserves. At the minute, I would like to keep them around that level. And I think that if you look at and compare them with others, compare them with council reserves, they're quite sensible. I am aware that some services have got huge reserves, just as some councils have got huge reserves, and never seem to use them for the purpose they're there for. But that's not the case here. It's a prudent value, I think.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions for the Commissioner on the fire MTFS? No? Right, thank you. We'll go to item 9 on the agenda now then. Sorry, item 8 on the agenda, the police and fire plan consultation outcomes. Sorry about that. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to yourselves and fellow members who gave us your own feedback on the two plans following our presentation earlier in the year. I'm really pleased with the responses we've had this year. We've had record numbers of responses, and I know that the formal risk plan that the Chief Fire Officers consulted on at the same time has also had record responses. For me, a really encouraging thumbs up for the stuff that was in the plan. I would be horrified to think that the priorities that I'd picked up from the public were not reflected in their feedback to this. But I'll draw your attention, if I may, to the some of the percentages under very important in these sections. It's respond quickly and effectively to incidents, thoroughly investigate crime. 94%. Well, you would expect that, wouldn't you? This is exactly what core policing is all about. And a high response there, ensure that police and partners are equipped to tackle organised crime. Now, I think this specifically relates to people's concerns about vehicle crime in the last couple of years, vehicle theft, and that's why it's highlighted in the plan, along with rural crime and crime and abuse in retail settings, in shops and so on. Interesting for me to contrast that with some relatively low numbers around encouraging people to volunteer and so on, which is, I think, understandable, given people's particular concern at the moment that they want to see the services focusing on core business. And I think that reflects that in a time of challenge, you stick to your knitting. Welcome support, 81%, around me working with criminal justice partners for more rapid justice. We do, as I've previously mentioned to you, have an issue with delays in our court system in Staffordshire, and I think people are experiencing that. And for me, the most informative and often quite challenging element are the sections which detail some of the free text responses. Some are quite upsetting, you know, when they have a go at their police and crime commissioner's office and his value for money. I mean, it's an extraordinary value for money that I think me and my team provide, but clearly more to do in expressing that and demonstrating what we're doing. But also real emphasis on thanking the police and fire service for what they do, and notably, I think because we were consulting after the violent disorder this summer, people were reminded of just how they rely on the services. I was also caught in priority 1 on page 8 around fire and rescue, 71% robustly tackling unacceptable behaviour by firefighters and staff. Now, this is a clear, I think, recognition of what they will have read in the press around some areas with bullying, misogyny and so on. I can tell the panel that that is an absolute priority for us, but very much so for His Majesty's inspectors. They're looking at even heavier expectations of services in terms of fair treatment of everybody, which is a good thing. But some terrific endorsement of our work with the NHS and others, and across, again, this key thing, ensure the right resources are in the right place. Now, that is fundamental to the transformation piece we're doing with fire and rescue. So on the one hand, the two chiefs have to produce operational plans which are risk and evidence driven, take account of national priorities, but they also have to take account of these local priorities. And I think they reflect what the public would be telling you and your colleagues as councillors, but are certainly telling me when I consult with them, and I'm very pleased to see that. Chair, I wonder if I might just bring in Dave, my deputy. Dave is now very much in the seat for road safety, roads policing and so on, both reflected in the responses around the plan, but perhaps also just to bring us up to date with the road crime team change that I mentioned.
Yes, thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I think the plan does make quite clear the importance we place on road safety. It's something that I think we all need to think about. 45 people lost their lives on the roads of Staffordshire last year. That's quite a scary statistic when you think of it in those terms. We've just had the change from CMPG, the Central Motorway Policing Group, to our own roads crime team, which again I think is more efficient for us as a local area. It makes sure that Staffordshire's priorities are met by the force. That was launched in early October. Excuse me. For the month of October, just to give a few statistics, they were able to take assets, that's criminal assets, of £857,000, seizing assets that were traffic through our county, through the motorways. They made 73 arrests. They were able to find 19 stolen cars as well. And I think that gives a really good indication why it's quite a priority for the public as well as for the force themselves. I think it's important that we do deny criminals the use of the road, Chair, and I think that's absolutely something that's taking centre stage. On the safety side of things, we are now commencing work with our new low light cameras, so that the speed camera vans will be more effective for more hours of the day, particularly during winter when it goes dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's really important that people understand that if you are driving around and you're driving recklessly, the police will take action against you. I think that's right in terms of keeping communities safe. I think that's why it's central to the plan. It is good to see that reflected in the feedback as well, Chairman. So I think it's a piece of work that we'll continue to push with, and it's certainly something that I think we're starting to make some real headway with. Thank you.
Thank you. Just pick up on a question at that point in the context of road safety. I read an article that the police in Staffordshire have launched a campaign to check vision the vision of drivers. They're doing it in consultation with the DVLA. And you may be asked to, can you read that number plate at 20 metres? That sort of comment. Can you just give us a bit more information around that campaign, please?
Thank you, Chairman. That's right. So we know there's a number of user groups on the road that are vulnerable, so young drivers, older drivers. It's important that we're all able to, where we can, drive safely and make sure that we're fit to drive. The visibility test, I don't know if they still do, I assume they do. When I did my driving test far too long ago, Mr. Chairman, I was asked that by my instructor before I even got in the car, could I read a number plate from so far away? And one of the things that occurred to me actually when we were launching this campaign was, I haven't checked if I can still do that. I did and I can, I'm very pleased to say, but I think it's something about being reflective really for all road users, that we should always ask ourselves those questions. Are we actually fit to drive? And we do that, don't we, when it comes to drink or when it comes to other things. But actually, as our own health deteriorates as we get older, things like eyesight, which is really hard sometimes to identify, it's right that we're launching that campaign to try and emphasise to people that we should always be asking that question, are we fit to drive? I often reflect my grandfather, he's passed away now, but he used to drive. And one of the things I've said to him once, I said, you always drive at 15 miles an hour and people beep at you. So, well, I can't see very well. And it hadn't really entered his mind he shouldn't really be driving. So it's actually how you have that conversation a little bit. So as we get older, we make sure we keep ourselves safe on the road and keep everyone else safe with us, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to ask the next question when it came to questions from the panel members, but I wonder if I could just weave it in at this point. Are officers, if officers come across people who have a hearing impediment or a speech impediment, are there any staff, both in the fire service and the police service, who are trained to use sign language and communicate in that way?
Chairman, thank you. And thanks for just giving us a nod in advance on this question, because it meant we could ask the operational team. There's some, believe it or not, there's a network called PLOD. Police link officers for deaf people. And it's there to, it's an informal network, but it's there for people with qualifications in British Sign Language to support their colleagues around the country. They can reach out to that, they can reach out to it via their police devices, etc. If we need evidential purposes, if people are being interviewed, etc., then specialists are brought in to assist as well. But yes, it's something that's on the police's radar, as are all concerns about disability, but also perhaps neurodiversity, other issues that might mean people need special support if they're involved with the service. I think the police are more aware than ever. Just to pick up briefly on Dave's point there about older drivers, the service are just considering, and I support this, offering older drivers that are pulled up for some sort of traffic infraction, offering them the choice of an assessment or the normal prosecution route, a choice. If they choose the assessment and the assessment finds that they are not fit to drive anymore, then their licence will be taken. But they go into that in an open situation. We talk about young drivers, the risks to them. There's a proposal around graduated licences, not allowing young drivers to do certain things. I'm less supportive of that. I think that's a more fundamental freedom limitation. But for older people to make a choice, perhaps consider their own health and fitness to drive at an appropriate moment, I think it's a good thing, and we should see that come in shortly.
Okay. Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Dave Evans regarding the roadside eye test. Is this scheme ongoing? And during the last check, did we come across any drivers who were poor eyesighted? And the second question is around the old age drivers that you mentioned assessing. What is the age limit of the old drivers that we want to assess? Is there a sort of age limit that you have come up with?
If I take the first question and the Commissioner takes the second. I haven't got any statistics in front of me in terms of the eye check, but I can certainly get them and make sure that they're shared to the panel, because I think it is important. One of the things I just wanted to clarify, though, just on that, eyesight, it's very easy to say eyesight is about elderly drivers, and there will be an element of that. But eyesight can also deteriorate in younger people too. And I think that's really important that we're clear about that. Because actually on that question of thinking about, are you fit to drive, had you asked me 6 months ago, have I ever really considered my own eyesight? Well, no. I'm 35. Why would I need to? I don't need glasses. But sometimes you should think that, because actually you don't notice a gradual deterioration of anything, do you? So I think it is quite important. We don't just pigeonhole that to be an elderly driver issue. That's any driver. We all need to be able to see to drive, I think. And I'll let you answer the second.
Councillor, I don't believe there's an age point. I think this is at the discretion of the officer based on the suitability to drive, and typically they will have stopped someone, perhaps they're drifting across the road, or they've moved out into a junction without due attention, that type of thing, that might suggest to the officer that there's somebody here who's not totally in command of their faculties. And then there is a sort of a proper assessment of driving along with medical assessment to support the outcome. But it is on the basis that the individual would choose to volunteer for that.
Thank you. Just a comment, if I may, before I go to Adrian. LED lights now are becoming a challenge to a lot of drivers, regardless of age. The intensity of them, particularly in the rain, if it's a wet environment. So there's additional risks, I know we'd come back to the word, for everyone who's out on the highway at the moment. So vigilance is so important. Adrian, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid a theme I've raised before, and that is about the difficulty when we're giving statistics without context. For example, you said earlier that the group had recovered 19 stolen vehicles. That sounds great, and if it's 19 out of 19, that's brilliant. But if it's 19 out of 200, it doesn't sound quite so good. So I'm sorry to repeat this, but when we're given this info, can we please be given an indicator of how meaningful it really is? Thank you.
Yes, I think Adrian's mentioned that several times before. I wonder if colleagues from the Commissioner's Office could take it on board, please.
Chairman, I was just about to thank Adrian again, because the amount of time that Ralph and colleagues in our team took when putting the plan consultation together, and our annual report that we delivered to you at the last meeting, I believe, to put every statistic in context was considerable. And there's Dave, I've dropped him in it. He hadn't got the context, so my apologies. We are trying. And I absolutely take your point, because actually 19 recovered vehicles in the period of time they've been working is a considerable step up, alongside all the other stuff they've been doing with uninsured drivers, people without MOTs. And there's a comment here in the response to the plan. Deny criminals in Staffordshire use of the road. Absolutely what we're doing. Increase road safety, fundamental target, and make car thefts a priority. Well, it is in the plan. So it really does matter, but I take your point about the stats.
Okay, I think there's a question over there. Ms. Deedit.
Thank you. It's really good to hear that police officers will now be taking that initiative if they find someone who's drifting across the road or whatever, and asking about that assessment. My question to you is, because I've recently had some experience of this, do you think that the current legislation around elderly people and the kind of tests that they take is strong enough? Because the experience I had, it was only due to something else that this person got tested and could have gone on driving for another 10 years dangerously. And I didn't know until now how little there was in place for elderly people to be tested, and it's a real concern to me, especially as we have an ageing population. Nearly everybody drives. There must be thousands of people out there on the road who maybe shouldn't be. I don't know.
I think Councillor Dean makes a really good point. There are, thankfully, more people are living longer lives. Certainly in a place like Staffordshire, if you haven't got a car, you can't get to the shops, hospital, all the rest of it, so you're in your car. And having a vehicle is really important, massively important. I'm not an MP. It's not for me to change the legislation. But by all means, lobby your MPs about this. My own view is that 3 years ago, I wasn't satisfied enough officers trained fully in roads policing were on the roads in Staffordshire looking out for dangerous driving, but also drivers that might have caused concern. So this commitment we've had over the last 3 years to build up that roads policing team, them not to be distracted off into other tasks, they are pulling people over who are drink, drug, otherwise affected, and quite often it is clearly that the individual is not as capable as they might once have been, for whatever reason. Could be an illness situation. So for me, it's part of the value of visible roads policing, over and above what a camera might detect and things like that. We do have ever more elaborate camera systems. In fact, in Staffordshire at the minute, we have AI cameras being deployed to look at phone. They will pick up phone use, lack of not using your seatbelt, and there may well be opportunities there for them to identify drivers that might need to ask themselves the question, is it time for me to be tested?
I think the other thing to mention really, and something that the partnership's been focusing on, is raising that awareness around vulnerable road users. And I think particularly, if I use the example I used earlier of my grandfather, I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, if that was a conversation I'd be having now, I'd have probably said, I'd have probably had a conversation with him a little bit. And I think it is about sometimes not just spreading the message to elderly drivers, but their families as well, so that, you know, you can ask that question and you can have that conversation in a way that's not with a police officer or somebody else, that can probably be a little bit more gentle around the way you have that, because ultimately, you want your family member to be safe as much as anything else. I think it's almost a societal change, as you say, as people live longer. I think we've got to be, learn to live with some of these challenges, but also learn to have those discussions with people we know to make sure that they're safe as much as anything else.
Yes, okay.
I totally agree on that, but what I've found is that it is down to the individual to give their licence up, and, you know, as a family, you can all be concerned, but if the person is in denial, which they probably will be because they've been driving for 60 years, so there's an issue there.
Councillor Atkins, did you...
First, a comment. I think it is very much down to families to I mean, I had to tell my mother to stop driving. It was a bit difficult because I wasn't actually driving myself at the time. But you know, I have had someone complain to me when I was an MP that he was having his driving licence taken away from him. Well, because he was incredibly dangerous. But instead of his son, you know, taking the bull by the horns and saying, Dad, look, you know, you really aren't safe for driving, he reported him to the DVLA. And then he was tested, and then he was declined. But, you know, it is really about responsibility when it comes down to it, because someone is driving irresponsibly, then they are, I mean, in my mother's case, it was putting the grandchildren at risk. And I think it is really important that people do take responsibility. And, you know, your nearest and dearest are the ones who see the challenges and are the most likely to be able to tap someone on the shoulder and say, that's enough, I think you've done enough now. And I do really think that it is about a responsibility. You can't expect any legislation to be able to pick up every case, but, you know, most people have a friend or family member who can just say, look, I really don't think you should continue. But the question I wanted to ask, particularly because there's been quite a lot of publicity around this, is the amount of involvement the police have had with youngsters who are vulnerable youngsters who are in unacceptable accommodation, who might be, for instance, in unregistered care homes, who might be in accommodation which is not meeting their needs, and whether you do have any contact with youngsters like that, and if so, what partnership arrangements do you have with care organisations to ensure that those youngsters are not exploited?
Part of the expansion, 100 extra officers in the public protection unit was to bolster the children's focused areas, also violence against women and girls, rape, etc. Children at risk of sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation, it is unfortunately quite often the case that children who are in the care of the state are overrepresented, just as they ultimately are in prisons down the line. It is an issue. I think it's core business for the police to have close relationships. They are actively involved in safeguarding activity in Marac's, safeguarding conversations, and now I think a good piece of new legislation that in all domestic abuse cases, any children involved are immediately considered to be victims, and that means that there is opportunities for them to receive support and assistance as well. I would suggest, Councillor Atkins, that is such a core sort of day-to-day piece of business as to be a given. If you've got any particular examples of where individual children might not be, to your mind, receiving the support or care they need, I'd be very interested, and I'm sure the police team would be as well.
Any particular cases, but it's very, very clear that there's sort of an epidemic of young, vulnerable children, young people, being put into accommodation where they don't get sufficient support, whether it be in Airbnbs, whether it be in caravans, you know, that sort of accommodation where they're kept under, well, they're not kept under control, that they are accommodated, but they're not being looked after. Their needs are not being their needs are not being met, and therefore that can lead to antisocial behaviour. It can lead to youngsters absconding, and I just wondered really whether that sort of issue had hit your radar as a police service.
Chairman, it hasn't, not specifically, but I'll just bring Dave in. Dave had a role as lead member for Children's at Stoke-on-Trent for a while. He might have a bit more direct experience from the other angle.
Thank you, Commissioner. As you mentioned, I was the former Cabinet Member for Children's Services in Stoke. So the police are statutory partners of the Safeguarding Partnership Board, and I think certainly the things I've seen in the news as of late, particularly with young people on dole's orders that have been put in yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think, again, we're not MPs, but I do think there's a role for legislation tightening around children's homes. I've called for that repeatedly in my previous role, because I do think local authorities, and funding to local authorities to do this, because often the private care market is not as regulated as it needs to be, and you will know that as well as I do. That's a real challenge. I think where we've got planning applications going through with district councils and the city council for things like proposed certificate of development, so they're not going through a normal planning process, so the police haven't got the opportunity necessarily to comment, is quite a challenge. And I think there's a lot that could be done there. It's a very boring conversation around planning policy, but it is a really relevant one, actually, because these homes are springing up everywhere. The sheer volume of them means that they aren't as regulated as they need to be. They have an Ofsted regulation, but the reality is that an Ofsted's one day a year, not every day, and it's not the lived experience of some of these young people. So I think it's a really fair challenge to make. It's not something that I've picked up through the police myself any more than the Commissioner has, but it's a really important point.
Thank you for that. Mr. Khan, did you have a question?
Yeah, just finally, the last one on the consultation responses. Do we have a breakdown of people who responded to the consultation in terms of the ethnicity and age groups? Because it's important that we get a sort of a balanced view from our residents across the county, you know, young people, old people. If we know that people who have been engaged and responded, that gives us a fair sort of an picture.
I think there is I don't know whether you've had the time to look through the paper.
I'm afraid I've just come back from my holidays and I've been pretty busy. I haven't had the chance.
Well, the Commissioner
if it's in there, then that's why.
It is in there, but I'll ask the Commissioner to add clarity if needed.
It is, Councillor Khan, and it's on page 13 of the report there, top right. I don't think you'll be encouraged to see that summary as it's presented, however. And I've already taken on board, I think next time round, I may well be coming to stakeholders in a number of communities to ask their advice on how we can extend the reach, because that is that chart as it's presented is not reflective of our whole county's population as it stands. I think we could do better there. The other one, interestingly, on police and fire, there's a response to say there's a sense that the questionnaire led respondents to agree with everything and not prioritise. I think that's an interesting challenge, actually. I mean, yes, why not agree with everything? But perhaps I should be poking the question, given a choice, where do you see investment commitment should be made? Because it may be in the next few years that's a more important question than it has been. I may well be required to be giving more emphasis to some areas of concern than others.
Yeah, fine. Any more questions on that point? Okay, thank you. Item 9 on the agenda then is questions from the panel members. Thank you. We've had a fair range of questions already, but I wonder if I could just resurrect two. The first one was fire service accommodation, rooms not being available for community groups. I've sent that question in to you, and a policy on whistleblowing. I have mentioned them to Louise, and I touched on those before the meeting.
Excuse me, Chairman, I missed the first one. Something about community groups?
Community groups not being able to use fire service accommodation for meetings.
Yes, I think you might be particularly referring to the University of the Third Age, which was utilising our fire station at Stone, using the community group there. Smashing organisation, a lot of people involved with that. I'm afraid for me, the stations are open to the community when possible and when it doesn't compromise operational delivery. The benefits of the shared police post at that particular fire station are going to be considerable for the local community. It's a much better location for the police to respond to incidents from, and it is going to shorten the amount of availability we've got for them at that fire station. However, we advised them and others, I think over 18 months ago, of our intentions, and there are members of the service who've been assisting in trying to identify alternative locations. When we brought police and fire together in a more fundamental way in Hanley, there were a number of organisations that needed assistance, and I believe that we were helpful in finding them suitable alternative spaces to conduct their activities. And that's my ambition, that nobody's left without somewhere to go. It's regrettable it won't be necessarily the place it was before. Chair, I'm reasonably comfortable with that. I think if I went to the public and said, is this a community facility or is it a fire and police station, the majority are going to be with me and say, every opportunity for the communities, please, but not at the expense of our community safety delivery.
Well, anything you could do to accommodate the concerns that have been logged from Stone would be much appreciated, Commissioner, if you wouldn't mind.
Could I bring Louise, my Chief Executive, in around the whistleblowing, because she and I have done a bit of work in the last 2 years to formalise this process.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you. Yes, the question that you posed, Chair, related to a conversation that took place at panel back in June, and we have listened back to that message, and it was in the context of talking about complaints and misconduct and some statistics that we shared in a report. We're due to bring an annual report for both police and fire to the panel meeting in February, and I wondered if it would be appropriate to discuss this in more detail at that point in time.
Certainly. I think members would find that okay. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for that offer. We'll accept that opportunity in February. Thank you. Right. Are there any more questions for the Commissioner? No? Okay. Dates of future meetings and the work programme. In the notes, I think at this point, it might be the time to close the meeting. So thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you to the Commissioner and his team. 11:47, I'll close the meeting. Thank you.